Fool, no man can kill me.
As one of the most iconic characters in the films, we are going to give our Witch King the time that he deserves to make him look awesome for our collections. Now, we are going to kick off by painting the main part for both models, and that is obviously the robe that he is wearing. For both speed and a smooth application, a makeup brush was the tool used here. These brushes have smooth bristles and a large surface area, which lets us paint quicker and create blends with not much effort involved. And that's what we want here today. Some paint was added to an ever so slightly damp brush, and then the excess was taken off onto a sponge. Or you could use your hand instead. Do not use a tissue here, as this devious little paper will have a tendency to tear and shred. You will be left with unwanted, pesky little bits in your brush, and you do not want this on your miniature as you paint. I tend to do a circular motion here first to build up the coverage. You don't need to apply too much pressure here, just let the soft bristles glide over the surface and you will find the colour starts to appear. Let this paint go into some of the recessed areas, as we will work on the shading later on. A slightly lighter colour grey of Necromancer Cloak was used afterwards. We want to apply this paint in a similar motion as we did before. Focus your efforts more on the top surface of the robes and leave the recesses alone. We just want to give him a greyish looking robe here at the end of this stage. Once this part of the cloth is done, we will move on to preparing our horse at the same time. So today I will show you a new way of painting horses, just in case you want to replicate this method elsewhere, say a Rohan horse. Using a dry brush method by painting across the hair on the tail will enable us to highlight each strand in seconds. Now, can you see where the light is hitting the sculpture from above? This little trick is a guide to show us where to paint our lighter tones on the horse. So, using Necromancer Cloak, we shall pick these areas out. At this stage, don't worry about getting any of this paint onto the Witch King's armour or the horse reins, as we will be painting them later on in the video, so we don't need to be so tidy here. Now for the main colour of the robes, and 𝗕𝗿𝐾𝐒 was chosen for our lightest highlight. This browny grey paint is such a great colour for highlighting black clothing, and it's one of my favourite paints in the range. Opting for a slightly shorter bristled brush, here you want to pick out the outer parts of the folds. Once you have finished with this paint, you should see the darker recessed areas of the cloth, the transition of the greys up to our newest colour. And whilst we have our paint still out, we can go over the horse once more by applying a lighter grey to the upper parts of the muscles. And this will give a final appearance of a subtle zenithal highlight. So far we have been working on the grey areas of the cloth, and now we want to darken down those recesses. To do this, some Grim Black speed paint was made more translucent with some medium. You can do the same thing with acrylic black paint and clean water. But for me, I prefer using speed paints for this, because the Witch King compelled me to do so. Diluting the paint so that it will be a similar consistency to a shade paint, this was applied into the recesses on the cloth. It will not only make the overall robe look darker to the eye, but it will expand the shadows more, which in turn will make the highlighted areas look brighter. And on top of that, it will blend the shaded areas to create a nice transition from dark to light. So you can see that I'm a big fan of creating shaded areas towards the end of the process when painting cloth. This technique was also done on the horse to create more definition between the muscles and also create some shadows for the straps and reins. So, the cloth on our Witch King is looking pretty good. If you feel like that's perfect for you, then you can leave it there, and move on to the details, which I have timestamped below. We shall switch over to a finer detail brush now, and go in with some Castle Grey paint. This was thinned down slightly with water to make it easier to apply faint lines on the cloth and create that texture. These lines were painted to go across the folds of the cloth, as well as picking out some of the highlights too. Doing all of these lines doesn't take as long as you may think, and once you have found your rhythm, then it's actually quite therapeutic. Afterwards, some of the more prominent folds and highlights were picked out with 𝐒𝐿𝐷𝐃𝐒. This time, a mix of painting lines and small dots was the method here, just to give a bit of variety on the texture. I would say it's better to go over the whole model once and pick out a few areas. Take a moment to study the miniature and see if you want to add any more afterwards, as adding too many lines of this grey texture can make the robes look a bit brighter looking, rather than the dark, mysterious gentleman that he is. So we have done the majority of our Witch King. Huzzah! And we can take this opportunity to grab a cup of tea and then begin our details. All of the metals were picked out with gunmetal paint first. This includes the weapons, his armour, and helmet. Don't forget to pick out his little feet poking out from underneath his robes. To make this metal more eerie and evil looking, a purple tint was added over the top of it. You can do this by either using a purple tone wash or diluting down some 𝐼𝐻𝐷𝐿𝐴 purple speed paint, like I did for this miniature. Because of the wonderful details of this sculpt, this purple will flow into the recesses nicely, especially on the sword and armour. Now, whilst the purple was drying on both of our miniatures, the horse was given a once-over with some dark wood speed paint. This was applied all over, including the tail. The unique properties of speed paint will give us not only complete coverage quickly, but also create some nice darker tones in the recessed areas. This, along with the quick work we did earlier by picking out the lighter areas of the muscles, will give us a nice dark brown horse. If you have not come across speed paints before, or want to know more about the capabilities of the range, then I recommend my new to Army Painter speed paints video, which you can check out after this one to learn more. So we shall pop the horse to one side and let it dry. After looking at the Witch King for a moment, I decided to add an extra colour to break up the silver, black and grey of the miniature. Copper was added to the handle of the mace, and instantly it made the weapon detail pop out a little bit more. Sometimes you may want to take a step back and see if you need to add anything else to a miniature that you didn't think about before, and this was the case here. Afterwards, all of the metals were given a wash of dark tone. This was to give more definition to all of the metal elements on the miniature, especially the mace and the armour. Again, whilst this was drying, the belt was given a base coat of black. It's always nice to have a different part of the miniature to paint whilst something else is drying. Also, it's one of the methods that I use to help me speed up the way that I paint little toy soldiers. Question of the day. What other methods and hacks do you guys use to help speed up your miniature painting process? Let's help each other out with some good tips in the comments below. Also, if you are finding value in this video and you want to see some Middle-earth content from me, then please do consider stabbing the like and subscribe button with a Morgul blade. Or a mouse. A mouse will do. So, continuing with the belt. As we used some warm greyish brown tones for the robe, we want to make the belt stand out slightly and be seen. So we shall go for some more colder bluish tones for the highlight, just to make sure it will stand out enough, but also still look like it's made from a black material. Highlighting this first with some wolf grey, all of the edges were carefully painted. Afterwards, some fog grey was used mainly to pick out the holes for the buckles, as well as just the top edges of the belt itself to create a brighter highlight. And because we all love to highlight, the metals were picked out next with some shining silver, using our trusty detail brush. This then gave some added definition to our miniature, and even though it is mainly only silver and black, the included colours of copper and purple will give it that little bit extra to stand out more compared to, say, normal Nazgul miniatures. If you have them, of course. Now, back to the horse. We have a dull dark brown colour to the beast, And now we are going to pick out the muscles that little bit more to make them even more defined. To do this, we are going to use the reactivation properties of the speed paint layer underneath to our advantage. Again, if you are not aware of this awesome feature, then please do check out my new to speed paints video, as I will explain this further so it will make sense. Tanned flesh was thinned right down with some clean water. We want this to be about the same consistency as milk. Then, by adding a thin layer onto the muscles of the horse, this water will reactivate the speed paint layer and it will start to blend together. Just imagine doing watercolours in art class back in school. It's kind of like that. The tan flesh starts off looking quite bright, but it will dull down slightly as it dries. So I would recommend going over all of the muscles once and then letting it dry, which takes only a matter of seconds. And then you can go over them again as many times as you would like to get your required result. From recording this video, the horse took me just under 5 minutes using tan flesh, when applying multiple layers. The eyes and tongue were picked out with red to make the steed look more sinister looking, which I think is quite fitting for all of the Nazgul. And a highlight afterwards of lava orange was used for the eyes, and scar tissue was used for the tongue, respectively. For the cloth of the horse's hood, a highlight of field grey was used. This is more of a greyish green colour, and this will make a subtle difference from the Witch King's robes to insinuate again that it is a different material that the horse is wearing. And speaking of robes, let's dirty them up a bit, as he is an evil character after all. Some weathering powder was used for this step. If you haven't come across this before, then let me explain. It is basically a coloured powder, or pigment, that can be applied onto a miniature by brush. It can be a great material to add extra elements to a miniature, such as rust, dirt, or soot, to name a few. However, do not use your best brushes for this. The powder will sit on top of the model, and you can layer this up as much as you like to your desired effect. I would say, however, less is more in this case. It's very easy to overdo it. Once you have applied a weathering powder, you can spray varnish the miniature to set it in place. Otherwise, it will rub off if you keep handling your miniatures during your games. Now, I do like adding extra details just like this, especially to a miniature that doesn't have a great deal to it. It allows you to be a little bit more creative and try something different on your miniatures. So that's the Witch King and his horse steed. And if you want to see how to paint up this winged fiend, the 𝗕𝗏, then click on the video up here. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep on hobbying.